The sound that woke me up wasn't an alarm. It was a car horn, long, angry, deliberate, blaring just outside my house. Not a tap, not a mistake. The kind of horn someone leans on when they want the whole street to know they're furious. I didn't move at first. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between each blast. 3 seconds. Pause. Another blast. My wife stirred beside me. Is that outside? Yeah, I said quietly. Stay here. I slipped on my boots and stepped out into the morning air. The sun was barely up, that pale gray-blue light that makes everything feel unfinished. The street was empty except for one thing. A silver SUV stopped directly behind my truck. My truck, which was parked halfway into my own driveway. And behind the SUV stood her, hands on hips, jaw tight, phone already in her hand like a weapon. She looked me up and down before I even spoke, eyes flicking to my boots, my t-shirt, the small scar on my cheek. The kind of look that isn't curious, it's already decided you're a problem. You can't park there, she snapped. I glanced behind me, then back at her. This is my driveway, she scoffed. Not laughed, scoffed. Like I just told a joke she was offended by. No, it's not. Driveways don't block the sidewalk. It doesn't, I said evenly. And even if it did, it's still mine. She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Sharp, expensive, and aggressive. I live here, she said. I know the rules. That was the first red flag. Not I think. Not maybe. I know the rules. I nodded once. Okay. That seemed to annoy her even more. You need to move it. Right now. I will, I said. In a minute. Her eyebrows shot up. Excuse me, I said. In a minute. That's when she pulled the phone up and angled it toward my face. I'm calling the police. I looked straight at the phone, then at her. Go ahead. She smiled. And it wasn't relief, it was victory. Like she'd been waiting for me to say that. Oh, I will. She turned slightly away, already tapping the screen. I could hear her voice rise, polished and performative. Yes. Hello? There's a man illegally blocking a driveway and refusing to move his vehicle. He's being very aggressive. I almost laughed at that part. Very aggressive. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't moved toward her, hadn't even told her to leave. But I said nothing, because experience has taught me something important. People like her dig deeper when you don't fight back. I leaned against my truck and waited. As she talked, neighbors started peeking through curtains. One garage door creaked open halfway down the street. A man watering his lawn slowed to a stop, pretending not to stare. She paced while she talked, nodding dramatically. Yes, I feel unsafe. Yes, he's refusing to comply. Yes, I think he lives here. But that doesn't matter. That line caught my attention. That doesn't matter. When she hung up, she turned back to me, phone still in hand like a badge. They're on their way, she said. I suggest you rethink your attitude. I smiled. Just a little. Great, I said. I'll wait. That threw her off. Most people panic when police are mentioned. They apologize. They explain. They scramble. I did none of that. Instead, I reached into my truck, grabbed my coffee mug, and took a slow sip. Her eyes narrowed. You think this is funny? No, I said. I think it's educational. She huffed. People like you always think you're above the rules. That one almost made me laugh for real. People like me. I looked at her carefully now. Mid-50s, maybe. Designer sunglasses even though the sun wasn't fully up yet. HOA keychain hanging from her wrist. The confidence of someone who has never been seriously challenged and doesn't expect to be today. Let me guess, I said. You're with the HOA. Her chin lifted. I'm on the board. Of course she was. And you? She added. What do you do? There it was. The question wasn't curiosity, it was classification. I shrugged. I work on the base. She smirked. So maintenance? I didn't correct her. Because here's the thing. When you tell someone exactly who you are too early, they stop revealing who they are. I'm documenting this, she said, holding up her phone again. In case you try something. Good idea, I replied. Make sure you get my good side. She scoffed again and turned away. Minutes passed. The air felt thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. My wife watched from the window now, arms crossed tight against her chest. I gave her a small nod. I'm fine. A police cruiser turned onto the street. Then another. Her posture changed instantly. Straighter, more confident. She waved them down like old friends. 2 officers stepped out. One younger, one older. The older one glanced at my truck, then at me, then at her. What seems to be the problem? He asked. She jumped in before I could speak. He's blocking a driveway and refusing to move. I told him it's against HOA regulations, and he became confrontational. The younger officer looked at me. Sir. I met his eyes calmly. It's my driveway. She laughed. Out loud. See? That's what he keeps saying. The older officer raised an eyebrow. Is it? I reached into my pocket slowly, deliberately, and pulled out my keys. The house key, the truck key, the small, worn metal fob that had been with me longer than most of my neighbors had lived here. I held them up. I live here. She crossed her arms. That doesn't make it legal. The older officer looked at her now. Ma'am, if it's his property. It's a shared community, she snapped. There are rules. HOA rules don't override property law, the officer said calmly. Her face tightened. So you're just taking his side? I'm listening to the facts. She turned to me sharply. You could have avoided all this by just moving. I leaned slightly forward. You could have avoided all this by asking. That was when the older officer asked the question that changed everything. Sir, he said, may I ask where you work on the base? I paused. Just long enough. Command, I said. The younger officer blinked. Command, as in, yes, I said. That command. There was a beat of silence. Not dramatic, not explosive, just heavy. I met his eyes calmly. It's my driveway. She laughed. Out loud. See? That's what he keeps saying. The older officer raised an eyebrow. Is it? I reached into my pocket slowly, deliberately, and pulled out my keys. The house key, the truck key, the small, worn metal fob that had been with me longer than most of my neighbors had lived here. I held them up. I live here. She crossed her arms. That doesn't make it legal. The older officer looked at her now. Ma'am, if it's his property. It's a shared community, she snapped. There are rules. HOA rules don't override property law, the officer said calmly. Her face tightened. So you're just taking his side? I'm listening to the facts. She turned to me sharply. You could have avoided all this by just moving. I leaned slightly forward. You could have avoided all this by asking. That was when the older officer asked the question that changed everything. Sir, he said, may I ask where you work on the base? I paused. Just long enough. Command, I said. The younger officer blinked. Command, as in, yes, I said. That command. There was a beat of silence. Not dramatic, not explosive, just heavy. Her smile faltered. What does that even mean? The older officer straightened a little. Sir, are you? I am, I said quietly. And for the first time since she stepped onto my driveway, Karen looked unsure. Not scared, not apologetic, just unsure. She laughed nervously. This is ridiculous. Anyone can say that. I reached into my pocket again and pulled out my ID. Didn't wave it. Didn't shove it in her face. I handed it to the officer. He looked at it, then looked at me, then looked back at it again. His expression changed, not fear, not awe, but recognition. Yes, sir, he said, handing it back. Apologies for the inconvenience. The word sir landed like a dropped plate. Karen's head snapped toward him. Sir. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. That doesn't mean anything, she said quickly. This is still an HOA matter. I took one step closer, not toward her, but into the space of the moment. Let me ask you something, I said calmly. When you called the police, what exactly did you want to happen? She opened her mouth, closed it. I wanted you to follow the rules, she said finally. No, I said softly. You wanted to be obeyed. Her eyes flashed. How dare you? Because if this were about rules, I continued, you would have checked first. You would have asked. You would have listened. The older officer cleared his throat. Ma'am, there's no violation here. She stared at him like he'd betrayed her. So that's it, she said. He just gets away with it? I shook my head. No, I said. This is where it starts. She frowned. What does that mean? I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw something behind the anger. Fear. Not of me, of losing control. Because, I said, you didn't just call the police on a neighbor. I paused. You tried to assert authority you don't actually have. The street was completely silent now. Even the birds seemed to have stopped. She scoffed weakly. You think you're special because of your job. No, I said. I think you're dangerous because of yours. Her mouth fell open. The officers exchanged a glance. And the worst part, I added, is you still don't realize what you've done. She pointed at me. This isn't over. I nodded. You're right. Because this was only the introduction. Karen didn't leave. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Most people, once the police confirm they're wrong, retreat. They grumble, complain to a spouse, maybe file some passive-aggressive email later. But she stayed planted at the edge of my driveway like the ground belonged to her. Arms crossed, lips pressed tight, eyes calculating. The officers returned to their cruiser, clearly ready to be done with this. The older one gave me a nod before closing the door. Have a good morning, sir. The cruiser pulled away, and the moment it disappeared around the corner, Karen exhaled sharply, like she'd been holding her breath through the whole exchange. She turned to me, slowly. You embarrassed me, she said. Not I'm sorry. Not there's been a misunderstanding. You embarrassed me. That wasn't my intention, I replied. You did that yourself. Her nostrils flared. I was enforcing community standards. No, I said. You were enforcing your ego. That word hit her harder than I expected. Ego. You could see it land. People like her don't think they have one. They think they are the standard. You can't talk to me like that, she snapped. I glanced behind her. More curtains were open now. People pretending to water plants, check mailboxes, scroll phones, anything to justify watching. I'm talking to you exactly like that, I said calmly, because this isn't an HOA meeting. It's my home. She stepped closer again. Too close. You think your little ID scares me? She hissed. I deal with people like you all the time. I smiled slightly. That's the problem. You think you do. She shook her head. You military types are all the same, used to barking orders. But this isn't your base. I let the silence stretch, because she was half right. This wasn't my base, which meant I didn't have to follow command protocol. Didn't have to de-escalate politely. Didn't have to pretend. This is my neighborhood, she continued, voice rising. And we have rules for a reason. People like you move in and think. People like me? I interrupted. She stopped. There it was again. That phrase. The crowd was listening now. You could feel it. People lean forward when they sense something dangerous might be said. She hesitated just long enough to realize she'd stepped on a landmine. I mean, people who don't respect structure, she corrected quickly. Structure, I echoed. Interesting word choice. She scoffed. You're twisting my words. No, I said. I'm finally hearing them clearly. She took a breath, visibly reining herself in. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. Smoother, colder. You know, she said, being a commander doesn't make you untouchable. I don't think it does. And it doesn't mean you're above the HOA. I nodded. Agreed. That surprised her. So, she said cautiously, then you'll comply. With what? I asked. She gestured vaguely. The regulations. Parking. Conduct. Respect. Show me the violation, I said. She blinked. Excuse me? Show me, I repeated. Which rule did I break? That's not how this works, she snapped. You don't interrogate me. No, I said. You don't get to make accusations without specifics. Her voice rose. I don't need to justify myself to you. I tilted my head. Then you don't need my compliance. She stared at me like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. This is exactly why people don't like military neighbors, she said loudly enough for the street to hear. Always defensive. Always threatening. I laughed once. Short. Sharp. You called the police on a man standing in his own driveway, I said. And I'm the one being dramatic? Her cheeks flushed red. I will be filing a formal complaint, she said. With the HOA. And the city. Good, I replied. Paper trails are useful. That line unsettled her. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said, every move you make from here on out becomes part of a record. She scoffed. You think I haven't done this before? I'm sure you have, I said. That's why this time matters. She took a step back. Just one. Subtle. Almost invisible. Don't threaten me, she said. I'm not, I replied. I'm informing you. There's a difference. She looked past me toward my house, toward my wife still standing at the window. And what about her? Karen said suddenly. Is she always watching like that? I felt something tighten in my chest. Leave my family out of this. She smiled thinly. Then control your behavior. That was the moment. The exact moment. The line. I stepped forward not aggressively, but decisively. Enough that she had to look up at me. You don't get to talk about my family, I said quietly. Ever. The volume dropped out of my voice, but the weight doubled. People misunderstand power, they think it's loud. It's not. Real power is calm, controlled, certain. Her smile vanished. I was just saying. No, I cut in. You were testing boundaries. She swallowed. And here's the boundary, I continued. You do not harass my wife. You do not linger on my property. And you do not misuse public resources to satisfy your need for control. She straightened. You can't tell me what to do. I nodded. You're right. That surprised her again. But consequences will. She laughed nervously. Is that another threat? No, I said. That's experience. She looked around, suddenly aware of the audience. The neighbors. The witnesses. This isn't over, she said again. But this time it lacked conviction. I agree, I replied. It isn't. She turned sharply and walked back to her SUV, heels clicking against the pavement like punctuation marks. But she didn't drive away. She sat there, engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching. I went back inside. My wife met me at the door. Are you okay? Yes, I said. But she's not done. She frowned. How do you know? Because she didn't get what she wanted. What did she want? I looked out the window at the idling SUV. To win. Minutes passed. Then more. Finally, her SUV pulled away. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, the email arrived. Subject line. Notice of violation. Immediate action required. I opened it slowly. 3 alleged violations. 1 warning. 1 fine. For hostile conduct. For obstruction of common pathways. For intimidation of HOA board member. I stared at the screen, then laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was predictable. She hadn't backed down. She doubled down. I forwarded the email to one address, then another, then one more. Within an hour, my phone rang. Sir, the voice on the other end said carefully, we need to talk about an HOA situation. Do we? I replied. Yes, he said. Apparently there's been an incident. Several, I corrected. And there will be more. There was a pause. Sir, he said, lowering his voice. Do you want this handled formally? I looked back at the email, at the accusations, at the assumption that I'd just roll over. Yes, I said. I do. Another pause. Understood, he replied. We'll proceed. I hung up and leaned back in my chair. Karen thought this was about a driveway, about rules, about power. What she didn't understand was that she had challenged the wrong thing. Not my authority, my restraint. And restraint, once removed, doesn't come back quietly. Karen didn't wait long. She never does. People like her can't sit with uncertainty. Silence feels like weakness to them, so they fill it with emails, meetings, accusations, anything to regain control. The HOA notice was just the opening move. By the end of the week, it escalated into something bigger. Much bigger. It started with a letter slipped under my door. Not mailed. Hand-delivered. No envelope. No name. Just paper. I picked it up, already knowing what it was before I read a single word. Final warning. Failure to comply will result in legal action. I smiled, not because I was amused, but because now it was undeniable. She was desperate. I brought the letter inside and placed it next to the email printouts I'd already saved. Dates highlighted. Language circled. Patterns marked. My wife watched me carefully. You're calm, she said. I'm patient, I replied. There's a difference. That evening, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered. This is Karen, she said, no greeting, no courtesy. You need to fix this. Her voice was strained. Tight. Fix what? I asked. The violations, she snapped. The tension. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I leaned back in my chair. You filed the complaint. Because you forced me to. Interesting phrasing. You forced me. I parked in my driveway, I said calmly. You escalated. She exhaled sharply. You're being intentionally difficult. No, I replied. I'm being precise. She paused, then tried a new tactic. You know, she said, lowering her voice, we could resolve this quietly. No fines. No records. By doing what? I asked. By acknowledging you were wrong, she said. Publicly. There it was. Not compliance. Submission. I wasn't wrong, I said. Her tone hardened instantly. Then you leave me no choice. You never wanted a choice, I replied. You wanted control. She hung up. 2 days later, the HOA meeting notice went out. Mandatory attendance requested. My name was bolded. So was the date. The room was full. Too full. Not just board members, neighbors, people I'd waved to for years but never really known. The curious. The bored. The ones who loved drama as long as it wasn't theirs. Karen sat at the center of the table. Confident again. Prepared. She opened the meeting with practiced authority. We're here to address ongoing violations of community standards, she said, eyes flicking toward me, and behavior that undermines the safety and harmony of our neighborhood. Harmony. I waited. She presented screenshots, emails, carefully selected moments stripped of context. Then she spoke. This resident, she said, gesturing toward me without using my name, has repeatedly demonstrated hostility toward the HOA, law enforcement, and other neighbors. A murmur rippled through the room. She continued, voice steady. We have a responsibility to act. I stood. May I respond? I asked. She hesitated. Just a fraction. Briefly, I nodded. Of course. I didn't rush. I placed copies on the table. One by one. Emails. The violation notice. The hand-delivered letter. Then I spoke. You called the police on me for parking in my own driveway, I said. Calm. Clear. When they confirmed I was within my rights, you retaliated. She scoffed. That's your interpretation. No, I replied. It's the timeline. I pointed to the dates. Here's the call. Here's the police report. Here's the violation notice sent less than 48 hours later. The room grew quiet. You accused me of hostility, I continued, but you were the only one who escalated to law enforcement. Karen leaned forward. You intimidated me. How? I asked. She opened her mouth. Closed it. I felt unsafe, she said finally. I nodded. Feelings matter. She relaxed slightly. But facts matter more, I added. Her smile faded. You stood on my property, I continued. You filmed me without consent. You made assumptions about who I was and what authority you had over me. Her voice rose. You flaunted your position. I answered a direct question, I said. You mocked the answer. Gasps. Subtle. Real. She looked around, sensing the shift. This is manipulation, she snapped. You're trying to turn the room against me. No, I replied. I'm letting the room see you. That's when it happened. A neighbor spoke up. She did the same thing to me. Another voice followed. Me too. The third. She threatened fines over my trash cans. Karen's head snapped from side to side. This is not relevant. It is, I said quietly. It's a pattern. Her composure cracked. You're all ungrateful, she shouted. I volunteer my time to keep standards high, and you confuse standards with control, I replied. She slammed her hand on the table. I am the Hoa. Silence. Absolute silence. Even she realized what she'd just said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't smile. I simply said, no, you're not. Her breathing became shallow. You're an elected board member, I continued. Not law enforcement. Not a judge. Not above the people you serve. Serve. That word burned. You think you're better than us, she spat. No, I said. I think power should be accountable. The chair beside her shifted. Another board member cleared his throat. I think we should pause, he said carefully. Karen rounded on him. Don't you dare. He swallowed. Karen, this isn't looking good. That was the moment she realized she was losing the room. Her voice went shrill. This is a coup. No, I said. It's transparency. She pointed at me. You did this. I met her gaze. You did. The vote was quick. Too quick. Temporary suspension pending investigation. Karen sat frozen as the words landed. Suspension. Not removal, but close enough to taste the fall. She gathered her papers with shaking hands. This isn't over, she whispered to me as she passed. I leaned in just enough for her to hear. It never is, I said. But it does end. Outside, the night air felt different. Lighter. Neighbors avoided my eyes or nodded with quiet respect. My phone buzzed again. A message. Proceeding as discussed. Findings soon. I looked back at the building. Karen stood alone in the doorway, phone pressed to her ear, voice frantic. For the first time, she wasn't controlling the narrative. She was reacting to it, and that terrified her. Karen disappeared for a while after the meeting. No emails, no letters, no violations. Silence. And silence in situations like this isn't peace. It's regrouping. I didn't relax. I didn't celebrate. I've learned the hard way that people who crave control don't walk away quietly when it's taken from them. They look for leverage, for sympathy, for angles you didn't guard. 2 weeks later, the investigation concluded. I received the call first. Sir, the voice said, measured and professional. The findings are significant. Go on. There's documented misuse of authority, selective enforcement, retaliatory action, and multiple complaints that were never disclosed to the board. I closed my eyes, not because I was surprised, because I knew what that meant for her. What happens next? I asked. A pause. She's being removed from the board effective immediately. Another pause. And the HOA will be issuing formal apologies to the residents involved. I exhaled slowly. Understood, I said. When the announcement went out, it spread faster than any violation notice ever had. People talk when power falls. Karen didn't come to my house. She didn't confront me in public. She didn't send one last angry message. She vanished. For a while. The first time I saw her again was at the grocery store. Different posture. No sunglasses. No confidence armor. She froze when she saw me at the end of the aisle. I nodded. Polite. Neutral. She hesitated, then walked toward me. I didn't know, she said quietly. I waited. I didn't know you were that, she added. That what? I asked. She swallowed. Important. There it was. The final misunderstanding. I wasn't important that morning, I said calmly. I was just your neighbor. She looked down. I was trying to keep order. No, I replied. You were afraid of losing it. Her shoulders sagged. I lost everything, she whispered. I studied her for a moment. Here's the truth most stories don't tell you. Victory doesn't always feel like triumph. Sometimes it feels like clarity. I didn't take anything from you, I said. I just stopped protecting you from consequences. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry, she said. And this time it didn't sound rehearsed. I believed her. But belief doesn't rewind damage. I hope you learn from this, I said. I will, she replied. Then she walked away. That night, my wife asked me something I'd been thinking about myself. Do you ever get tired of being the calm one? She asked. I smiled. Only when people mistake calm for weakness. She leaned her head on my shoulder. You didn't have to push back as hard as you did. I did, I said softly, because it wasn't about me. She looked up. Then what was it about? I thought about the neighbors who spoke up only after someone else went first. About the people who'd been fined, threatened, silenced. It was about teaching one person something, I said, and reminding everyone else of something. What? That authority without accountability always collapses. A month later, a new HOA board was elected. Different energy, different language. The first email they sent started with an apology. Not a policy update, an apology. That mattered more than any fine reversal. Here's what stayed with me. Long after Karen stopped being a presence in our lives, she wasn't evil. She wasn't a villain. She was unchecked. And unchecked power doesn't need bad intentions to do harm. It just needs silence. That morning in my driveway, I could have moved my truck, could have apologized, could have shrunk myself to keep the peace. And if I had, she would have done it again, to someone older, someone quieter, someone who didn't know their rights. Standing your ground isn't about winning. It's about interrupting a pattern. People ask me sometimes why I stayed so calm, why I didn't raise my voice, why I didn't threaten back. Here's the answer. Because the moment you match their chaos, you validate it. Real authority doesn't shout. It waits. It documents. It holds the line. If you're watching this and thinking, I've dealt with someone like that, you're not alone. And you're not powerless. You don't need a title. You don't need rank. You don't need permission. You just need clarity. Know your ground. Know your boundaries. And don't let anyone convince you that peace means submission. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who abuses power is refuse to bend.